in collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, can a truth commission pave the way for peace and reconciliation in Cyprus?
It is important to deal with the truth. I think truth is the foundation of peace. If there is no truth, peace cannot prevail.
Fleeing to Safety was the title of a moving photographic exhibition that was part of a conference this week on the refugee issue. We meet the world-famous photographer behind the lens.
Sometimes I cope with the emotion of what I'm photographing or filming, and sometimes I don't. But the problem is, you see, if you go in to a refugee camp or to a war zone and you're photographing someone's quintessential moment of fear and you break down in an emotional blob, you're not doing your job, and more importantly, you're not telling that person's story.
And the Minister for the Environment shares his thoughts on sustainability.
We have to think in a more sustainable way and not return to old practices that deteriorated the situation and brought the planetary crisis with the very severe environmental problems like biodiversity loss, like pollution, like climate crisis.
When we discuss the Cyprus problem and the troubled history of our island, we often come across suggestions that we need a truth commission. Now, I'm sure many of you are aware that these happen around the world. I think the best known was instituted in South Africa and worked very well. Fairly recently, at the Cyprus Forum, Achilleas Dimitriadis, who's a prominent Nicosia lawyer and also standing as an independent for our presidential elections next year, spoke about truth being the only way to move forward. He joins us now. Achilleas, really difficult when relatively recently we had our conflict. I know people say, oh, it's been 40 years or 50 years, but it's still in people's recent memory. Is that the time to do a truth commission?
Well, the answer is yes, because as far as I'm concerned, memory is something that the living people have to deal with. If we lose another generation, there will be no way of finding out the truth because the actors in the events that have taken place will have departed and we will not be able to draw the information from them. What I think is important for a truth commission, and you're absolutely right to say that South Africa is one of the most well-known ones. Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela did a great job in putting that together. And I think it shows the need after a conflict for a society to come to terms with the wrongs that had taken place prior to the end of the conflict. And there's a number of such commissions all over the world. I'll just remind you of Colombia, which was one which was in the news lately and was also quite successful. It is important to deal with the truth. I think truth is the foundation of peace. If there is no truth, peace cannot prevail. So I really think that we should deal with this issue, understand what the truth of our country was, both in 1963 and in 1974. I mean, there was the invasion in 74, there were the intercommunal clashes in 63, 64, and afterwards there were a lot of killings, missing persons, and one has to deal with this history. Admittedly, it's not very long ago that this has happened, but I think that's one of the reasons we have to do it now, because my proposal is to ask people who had participated in these terrible acts to come out, to give information, express remorse, and then in exchange of that, get immunity from prosecution. I think it's very important to give families of missing closure. I think people should be allowed to go to the cemetery and mourn their dead in the way their religion dictates it, and have a tombstone and do whatever people in their own religion want to do. And it's important because that will create the foundation of peace, which will then allow us to build our society again. Because the society has been hurt, these injuries have to be dealt with, and I think that this is a methodology that can bring about good. Now, let's just talk about the mechanics, because people talk about a truth commission and then how do you go about doing it. The biggest dilemma is whether you will give immunity in exchange of information, truth, and expression of remorse. Interestingly, this dilemma does not exist in Cyprus, because from 1990, the Committee of Missing Persons started operating in 1981, but from 1990, both Attorney Generals on both sides of the Green Line have given an undertaking to the Committee of Missing Persons to the effect that anybody who gives evidence before the CMP, which obviously involves atrocities, will not be prosecuted. So they've given a de facto immunity by convention. My suggestion is to elaborate on that, and it's just 3 steps. First, you need to amend the terms of reference, the mandate, if you like. That is simple because that can be done before the General Assembly of the United Nations. There's no veto by any power in the Security Council. A simple majority can do it. Any country can apply for this amendment. I hope the Republic of Cyprus takes the lead, and then countries like Greece, Turkey, the UK can also support it, and of course other right-thinking countries should also support it. So first you change the terms of reference, so you allow the Truth Commission to carry out an investigation and find the causes of death or the circumstances of disappearance, which is what we as a society owe to the relatives.
Do you think we as a society are ready for this? And I'm thinking of the fact that there is still a lot of animosity between certain sectors in the north and in the south.
Yes.
And if the Truth Commission comes across, well, we know about a lot of the massacres that took place on both sides.
Exactly.
And if this was then suddenly in the newspapers again, would it cause a reaction that would have the opposite effect?
Well, it is a possibility. My estimation is that it won't. I think there are people who are very old now who want to tell the truth, who do not want to depart this world by keeping these secrets. And I think it would be a good opportunity to do it. Of course, there may be an opposite opinion, but what's wrong in discussing it? I am putting forward this idea not in order to force it upon the society, but in order for the society to have an opportunity to deal with it, to analyze the benefits of this and the shortcomings if it doesn't take place. So I think amending the terms of reference and making an effective Truth Commission which will understand the circumstances of disappearance or death without being able to initiate a criminal case would be something good. The second thing would be to amend the evidence law so that none of this evidence given before the Truth Commission could be used in a criminal, a civil or administrative case. And then you just need to build up the regulations for the operation of the committee, which, since we will be upgrading the CMP, we already have the rubric: a Greek Cypriot, a Turkish Cypriot, and a third member, as they call it, normally a Swiss national. And these 3 people can actually start operating on this level. I see nothing wrong. Of course, it is rather revolutionary in bringing it about. But hey, it's happened in other countries. I mean, we're not the only country that has had a conflict. We're not the only country that has to deal with the truth as the foundation of peace in the future. And we can even ask for help. I mean, people from South Africa, people from Colombia can do it. And I'll come back to the Cyprus Forum. I was very fortunate to have heard former President of Colombia, Mr. Santos, give a very inspiring speech about the need for truth and the need for reconciliation. And I was moved by that. There was a very interesting discussion as well. And then I gave my presentation along the lines we've discussed. And I think that this could perhaps be the kickoff of a discussion on this matter, because there's no point hiding everything under the carpet for the time that there's no living person here that will enjoy the benefits of such a commission. And I think this is very important for the relatives of the missing or the victims. It's very important for the perpetrators because it will be some redemption for them. And it's also very important for society because we can finally look at ourselves in the mirror, deal with the truth, build our peace, and give a future for us and our children on this island.
I was going to talk a little bit about the children because the first thing that would have to happen after all of this would be to rewrite our history books, which at the moment just perpetrate the antagonism between the two sides.
Yes, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's rewriting the books is something that has to be done, just as a Truth Commission and just as many other things. So let's start with something concrete and let's get on with it rather than discussing it and avoiding taking action.
How far do you think that something like this could be, if you like, the bedrock of building trust between the two communities, which right now seems to be at a pretty low ebb, and without which there isn't a hope in hell of solving the Cyprus problem?
Absolutely right. I think we're in a new low. I think the trust that the two communities enjoy for each other is very low, and we have to build it. There's various political measures that can be taken, but I'll just quote what I gave in my speech, and I can see from my notes here. The Truth Commission is the seed of peace. Let's plant it and watch it grow.
Achilleas Dimitriades with his idea for another solution to some of the problems we face here in Cyprus. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rosie.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
There was a conference at the University of Cyprus earlier this week entitled The Refugee Issue, Challenges and Prospects. Now, we know that immigration is very much to the fore in anything to do with Cyprus, and there are differing opinions here. The interesting thing about this particular conference was that it also included a photo exhibition. My next guest is well-known photographer Sebastian Rich, and it's his photographs that are on display, or at least were, until Thursday. Hopefully it will be going to other centres in Cyprus, but he joins us now. Sebastian, you also, I think, spoke at that conference, so what were you saying?
Well, I was remarking at one point that, we have frighteningly surpassed the figure of 100 million people are now refugees. And I tried to put that in perspective at the conference. That's 99 million more people than there are in the entire Republic of Cyprus. Half of them children, and also in that frightening statistic, a largely forgotten 10 million disabled people. But we have to ask ourselves just how we got there.
Well, yeah, you mentioned the disabled. I remember an extraordinary story years ago when the first wave, if you like, was trying to make its way from Greece to Germany. And I think there was a girl in a wheelchair that really those sort of images and stories can make a difference. But we seem to have become, in a sense, inured to the fact that, there's more of them.
Yes, we are inured. I don't know if it's inured, but there's a sort of, how can I say, the world has got so many other problems. And, the average family now have huge problems of trying to meet, household bills and so forth, that it's very difficult to think of 100 million refugees. So what I try and do is I try and emphasise a single family's story, and hopefully that will cut across this huge figure that people can't comprehend anymore.
Yeah, it all becomes a little bit too much to take, doesn't it? Can we go back to how you got into the photography thing? Because you were, I think, a cameraman, were you not, in the war zones across the world?
Yeah, I was a news cameraman. Before that, I was a photographer that went into news work. I've always been a conflict, I still am a conflict photographer. I'm going back to Afghanistan and Ukraine before the end of this year. I have two hats. One is a photojournalist and the other one is a humanitarian photographer. I've been working with people like UNICEF and UNHCR and Save the Children for the last 25 odd years. But how I got into it, it was was a little strange because I am extremely dyslexic to the point of almost being illiterate. So when I was at school, a million years ago, no one knew about dyslexia, so I was just branded stupid and slapped round the head when teachers, this is in the day when teachers were allowed to hit you. So I became a very disruptive child in the class. But one day I got fed up with the teacher hitting me, calling me names, so I ostensibly left the house to go to school when I was about 14 and a half and never went back. But I then found that I could tell stories with pictures. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a household with my father was a film director and my mother a concert musician. I was immersed in a world of imagery, so I just picked up on that, and I found it a great way to tell stories. Of course, now I also write, but over the years I've developed tricks and so forth to help me write pieces. It takes a bit longer than most journalists, but it works. And I have, in the various organisations I work for, I have copywriters who are very used to my strange grammatical prose, if you like, and they correct it for me.
How do you cope with the emotion of what you're filming?
Sometimes I cope with the emotion of what I'm photographing or filming, and sometimes I don't. But the problem is, you see, if you go in to a refugee camp or to a war zone and you're photographing someone's quintessential moment of fear, and you break down in an emotional blob, you're not doing your job, and more importantly, you're not telling that person's story. But on the flip side of that, if you become so detached from it and don't have any feelings, and then you have to question yourself as a human being. I'm very lucky in a way, because I also have another skill. I'm a paramedic, and so sometimes, I come across a scene where a soldier has been wounded or someone's been hurt terribly. I take the photograph, put the camera down, and actually be of some use rather than just this lump of flesh standing there with a camera not doing very much apart from taking a picture. But how do I cope with it? As I say, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
You yourself were quite badly injured, weren't you?
I have unfortunately been shot 4 times, and that's not a badge of bravery, it's a badge of stupidity, because I'm obviously standing in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Because what happens to people like me is when a bomb goes off or when there's a firefight going on, most normal human beings run away from that. Unfortunately, people like myself run towards it. So it's a pretty stupid thing to happen.
Have you got family who are bothered by what you do?
Yeah, I have family, but I've been doing this literally professionally since I was 16. So my family, if you like, is completely used to this, and they know nothing different. I mean, obviously they worry when I go to, extremely dangerous places, but it works because it's been going on for so long.
It's just what you do, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, every now and again I get, I have become extremely cynical, which I try and keep that at bay. But every now and again, I try to do another type of photography that, people say to me, like, the analogy, if you like, is like you've been a carpenter all your life and now you're trying to convince me you're a plumber. So I've always, I have to think to myself, well, you just have to stay at what you're perceived as being good at.
There are so many conflicts going on all over the world. You mentioned that you're going back to Afghanistan and Ukraine. How do you choose where you should go next, where the story might be?
Well, most of the time now I don't really choose. I'm asked by organisations to go. The days of picking a location in the world where something's going on and doing it, then trying to sell the stories is kind of long gone. That's really for someone who's just starting out and trying to make a name for themselves as a conflict journalist. But now what happens? I mean, for instance, I will have, UNHCR or UNICEF or, the London Times or whoever it is asking me to go somewhere. So it's on commission. But every now and again, I do a passion project. Like I've literally just got off the plane from Malawi, visiting a long-forgotten refugee camp called Dzelica, which was originally built in 1994 for 10,000 people. It's now got 50,000 people. But the main crux of that story is that I accompanied a tiny little American NGO called Village Book Builders, www.villagebookbuilders.org. villagebookbuilders.org that builds libraries and stocks libraries in very, very marginalised children's schools all over the world. And that was a pro bono passion project. So it's little jobs like that take me out of that rather horrific world. It's almost like a cathartic exercise that I'll go and do something where someone's, it's a good story. It's a lovely story. And, I need to do more of those.
What about this data protection now? I mean, a lot of the things you mentioned include children. Does that impinge at all on how you approach those photographs?
Well, data protection for children is all important. As I mentioned, I do a lot of work for UNICEF, and many times I do a lot of work in conjunction with UNICEF on the release of child soldiers, mainly on the African continent. Now, you can't show their faces because these children have got to go back into the communities, and they face all sorts of rehabilitation problems. But yeah, for me, protecting a child is paramount. It doesn't matter. I've junked pictures that have been, I know that have been sensational, but I've junked them because the child is recognisable and so forth. So for me, children's protection is paramount.
Is there anywhere in the world that you haven't been that perhaps in one of your passion projects you'd like to be?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I can answer it just yet. It's the passion projects, if you like, have got to be a good time story, if you like. But unfortunately, I'm not very good at researching good, fun stories. I'm much better researching the rather horrific ones. But I'm trying very hard. But also, the passion projects, news editors, it's very difficult to get a good news story either on air or in publication. So I have to be very persuasive with my with my cohort of news editors.
But you have also done a lot of artwork as well, haven't you? Your photo essays and so on your website. So is there a preference, or do you really like the people projects?
Oh, for me, very much. It's people. I love to photograph people. I'm absolutely crap at landscapes. I don't have the patience for it. I love to interact with the people who are in front of my camera. That's one of the reasons I don't use zoom lenses, for instance, because if you have a zoom lens, you can stand 10 foot away from the person and get their photograph. I have to interact with the people that I'm photographing. I have to be able to really see them, smell them, and just be part of their lives for that moment that I'm with them.
Well, that certainly comes out in the Fleeing to Safety photography exhibition that was on this week at the University of Cyprus. And I hope, Sebastian, that somebody will put it into other areas of Cyprus, because we should all really know what's going on rather than just what we read in the papers or see on the TV, I think.
Yes, well, I hope the exhibition does move on. I'm always collaborating with UNHCR, and I shall certainly be mentioning that it might be nice if it moved to a couple more cities in Cyprus.
Photographer and recorder of all sorts of humanitarian issues, Sebastian Rich. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
The 9th Environment for Europe Ministerial Conference, a huge event that was held earlier this month in Nicosia, was addressed, among others, by our Environment Minister, Kostas Kadis. I caught up with him after his press conference and asked him what he hoped the conference would achieve, particularly for Cyprus.
Not only for Cyprus, but for the whole region that it is covered by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. We are surviving now the second crisis after the pandemic. We have now the consequences of the war in Ukraine and the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. And we have to consider the way that we will recover from this crisis. And we have to follow definitely a sustainable path. And this is the message that this conference is sending. So we will exchange views on how we could more sustainably recover from the crisis and how we could learn from each other and use the best practices in different sectors that the conference covers.
There is a danger, isn't there, that because of the crises that seem to be coming at us from all directions, that we'll take our foot off the sustainability gas. In other words, go back to easier options, which may in the long term be worse.
Now, this is I think, our opportunity to take advantage of alternative sources and ways of sustainable ways of living, and I think this is what will be discussed here. We should not focus on the easy solutions. So, for example, using alternative energy sources or adopting the circular economy model provides opportunities, and this is how we have to think the whole situation now. So we have to think in a more sustainable way and not return to old practices that deteriorated the situation and brought the planetary crisis with the very severe environmental problems like biodiversity loss, like the pollution, like climate crisis. So we cannot return back. We have to get adapted to the new situation and use alternative, sustainable ways of living.
And the minister finds himself in hot water at the moment, because earlier this week a letter from the Hunters movement called for his suspension, following the suspension of the Veterinary Services Director, Chrysodolos Pipis. The Hunters criticised the Environment Minister for that suspension because they say that Pipis followed all the protocols with a bout of brucellosis that broke out in a cow farm in Larnaca last year. The Agriculture Ministry responded with a statement saying that several veterinary service officers, including Pipis, had been found guilty of negligence while performing their duties. Quite why the Cypriot Hunters movement should be asking for the suspension of the Minister of the Environment is unclear, because there isn't really a connection between them unless it is that Kostas Kadis has got the importance of biodiversity very much in his sights, as we heard in that interview a few minutes ago. And in other news, 4 of the people allegedly involved in the Golden Passport scheme, which you will recall was scrapped last year, were due to appear in court this week. However, the Nicosia Criminal Court decided to postpone the first hearing following requests by the Defence Counsel for additional testimonial material. We should also note that the lawyer of one of the defendants, disgraced former House President Dimitris Silouris, who was captured on the Al Jazeera video The Cyprus Papers, being very much part of offering golden passports to potentially criminal applicants, has said that there is a clear conflict of interest, considering that the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General at the moment were both serving ministers in the cabinet that approved many of those passports. The new trial date has been set for November 30th, but it also remains to be seen what evidence can be brought against the accused, since much of what was in the Al Jazeera video is not going to be included by the prosecution. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.